read.
Why do they smell like biscuits? Why do they smell like biscuits?
Because they kind of are biscuits.
They are?
Yeah. I'm going to turn it over.
Oh, I forgot that.
Hi friends, I'm Rebekah from There Will Be a $5 Charge for Whining. Got some tea, hold on. It's peppermint. And I have another review for you today. I am a reviewer for the Old Schoolhouse magazine and the Homeschool Review Crew. And today we are reviewing Meriwether Lewis, Off the Edge of the Map by Jeff and Janet Binge. I think that's how you pronounce it. I am probably wrong. I have reviewed several of their books before, so I'm surprised. I needed to do probably a little bit more of research on that pronunciation. But these particular books come from YWAM Publishing, which is a division, the publishing division of Youth with a Mission. And this particular book series is from the Heroes of History. It is a biography series. They also have one of Christian heroes, which feature a lot of missionaries and the like. And we have reviewed from each series quite extensively. In fact, I was looking at our bookshelves the other day because I wanted to bring out another book that we had reviewed to kind of show you. And man, they have really blessed us. They have blessed us. We've enjoyed every single one. And this one was no exception. I say this a little sheepishly because I was not that aware of Meriwether Lewis's personal story, personal history. And I say that sheepishly because I consider myself a student of history and I actually write history curriculum. So I know about the nuts and bolts of the Lewis and Clark expedition, the general history, that sort of thing. But his story was very interesting, a little tragic, but very interesting. As you might know, Meriwether Lewis was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson when he was president to find a passage over the land to the Pacific Ocean. They wanted to find a better way through. There was all this vast territory, and they kind of wanted to see what was out there. The white man did not know much about it. They wanted to know more about botany and the animals and the geography of the situation. The Indians, they wanted to learn more about what was going on with them. So that was, of course, the Lewis and Clark expedition. That is something we have heard about, for years and years and years. But this story was a little bit more about Meriwether Lewis's story himself. So, a few things about the book. Now, I will say this. When you are dealing with certain characters in eras of our country's history, there are bound to be things that you come across, especially in this particular era, to me, that's just a little cringeworthy. They just don't set well with me. And I'm sure a lot of you understand this. For instance, a lot of our founding fathers, the writers of our Constitution, the framers of our Constitution were slave owners, and as was Meriwether Lewis. It's always been hard for me to kind of separate, the two. Of course, I didn't live in the time. I understand that circumstances were a lot different, and I got to listen to Josiah's speech. He's giving a speech right now at Co-op. Hold on. I'll be back. I'm back. Thank goodness for live stream and my son's homeschool co-op speech teacher. She's wonderful. She live streams the speeches today. I wasn't able to go, but that was wonderful. I got to see my son give his speech. Anyway, so I was talking about the kind of the lifestyles, the things that we come across in some of these, situations. I think we have to kind of look at it for what it is, accept the great things that went on, and also acknowledge the things that were not so great. Meriwether Lewis, an interesting life. He had a little bit of a tragic start. His father died when he was very young. He was an heir to a plantation, so had to learn to start doing that. He was a very curious boy and did a lot of reading about Captain James Cook, about his adventures, and that kind of spurred him to become more interested in kind of the exploration thing. His first opportunity for exploration was actually when he was very young. Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State, and he was looking for an individual to lead an expedition to the Columbia River, to the mouth of the Columbia River. I don't remember all the details, but Meriwether Lewis was very, very excited to apply for the job. He thought this would be great, but the job actually went to a French man named Andre something. His name I cannot pronounce. And Andre took off with his expedition of people, and President Jefferson found out he was actually a French spy. This Frenchman was going to, his attempt was to lead the American army, lead a group of American fighters to the landowners, Spanish landowners, and attack them. So basically he wanted to kick up some dirt. So that expedition kind of just, it did not go as planned. But William Clark, oh no, I'm not to that part yet. But Meriwether Lewis, he joined the army during the Whiskey Rebellion, and he was there for a time, and he actually got into a fight with a lieutenant. It was a political disagreement, and no telling what it was about, but it was a political disagreement, and he challenged this lieutenant to a duel, which of course was against the code of conduct and against the law. So he was court-martialed, he was arrested, and his commanding officer, a man named General Wayne, who was also known as Mad Wayne, pled lenience for him, and Mr. Lewis was transferred to another unit. This particular unit was where he met William Clark. William Clark was a little older than he was, but they became fast friends and built a relationship. Now, where the story becomes, I did not know this at all, but at 27 years of age, Meriwether Lewis was asked by Thomas Jefferson to become his personal secretary. Mr. Jefferson had become the President of the United States, so Meriwether packed his bags and moved to Washington, D.C., and that's kind of where all of this, you can see the progression of where it starts. Now, I am not going to tell you all of the story because you might want to read it. Your kiddos might be watching this and want to read it, and I am not one of those who's going to give away the ending. That's not how I roll. But I will say that there are some tragic circumstances behind Mr. Lewis's demise, and there's also some mystery, so it's interesting, really, really interesting. The writing of this book is so engaging. It's written in a narrative way. I love historical biographies. I don't love them when the authors take liberty and kind of expand on the story to the point that it doesn't meet. I realize you have to have some fill-in, but I enjoy these so much because they're just telling a story, and it's so interesting. And their writing, it just makes it just makes you feel like you're there. And I'm going to read a little bit of a real little bit if I can find it. I had it marked. Then I didn't have it marked. It's called Upriver. Just a little passage here so you can kind of get a good look-see about the kind of style of writing and what you can expect. This is from chapter 9, and it is Upriver. In the spring of 1804, the Missouri River flowed swift and deep, fed by melting snow to the west. As the water raged through the ravines, willows and cottonwood trees were dragged into the torrent. Sometimes they were pulled along by the current up to 5 miles an hour, forming huge battering rams that could puncture the keelboat's hull in a second. In places where the river's flow slowed or where shoals stretched out into the waterway, the uprooted trees piles up, forming nearly impenetrable barriers that the Corps of Discovery had to pick its way through. Every mile that the boats traveled upstream was measured in human sweat. On a good day, when the wind was behind them and the sail could be hoisted, they covered up to 20 miles. On the worst of days, it took men 12 hours to go 10 miles. These were the days when they had to get in the river and pull the boat using a long rope attached to the mast. With their backs hunched and shoulders bleeding from the rope burns, the men dragged the laden keelboat forward. York, who had enormous rippling muscles, and Alexander Willard, who was over 6 feet tall, powerfully built, took turns at the head of the tow rope, encouraging the others on by their sheer strength and determination. Oh, thank you, Jesus, for the car. You know what I'm saying? Can you imagine? I can't. You have to keep in mind too, at this time, the idea was that, you know, they weren't sure what they were going to encounter. Excuse me. Sorry. Thank you, Lord, for peppermint tea. But they weren't sure what they were going to encounter. There were rumors that there were mountains made of gold, which, you know, might not have been all that off, considering we had the California gold rush not too long after. There were rumors of man-eating dinosaurs, you know, and there was even rumors of Welsh-speaking Swedes up in the hills somewhere who had immigrated to the continent, you know, centuries before and just kind of were hanging out, had developed their own little, you know, group up in the hills. So they really weren't quite sure what they were going to come across. And we know, you know, the United States is vast. And every little part of it is completely different. The regions of it are so different. I've said to somebody before, if you grew up in the Midwest or in the lower Midwest, as I did, I grew up in the Ozarks. And our first visit when I don't remember how old I was, but we were on our way to San Francisco area to visit my grandfather, and going across the country and getting to the desert was like you're landing on an alien planet. And I can't imagine these men who were used to, you know, a certain kind of terrain and live, you know, wildlife, all of a sudden, you know, coming across these amazing things. So very, very interesting story. There is a wonderful unit study that came to us in an email. I think they used to come as actual books themselves, because I know that I think my Amy Carmichael study had a book, but I'm not for sure about that. I think that's the one that did. But I got a wonderful email it's all set up really nicely. I'm sure you saw part of that when I was doing the prep work. I filmed some of me going through that to look. And in just a minute, I'm going to give you kind of a bird's eye view of what's in the study guide and what that looks like, what we did. You can make this as big a project as you want, as you wish to, or you can just many ways to use this book. So I'm going to give you a bird's eye view, a look at what at what I got, and I will come back in just a minute. I will discuss another book or two and some options and all of that good stuff. So I'll see you in just a minute. I'm going to show you kind of a bird's eye view of the unit study. This is kind of just going to be a glance. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because that would take an hour. The YWAM unit study guides are fairly intensive. I just printed all of ours out. I started by just looking through it to see what I might want to do, and I just couldn't make up my mind, so I wound up using it. I'm kind of a paper girl anyway. You certainly don't have to do that. The first part, this is actually the part 2 to the unit study, and here's some printables that you can just use within the course of your study. You can see we did not use a one. There's a fact sheet, there's a couple of maps to use, a timeline. So that is something that you can use. And I'm just going to really quickly, I'm not going to put that back in, really quickly go through this. This is not the best setup, so I apologize for that. We are really country here. So I've also posted it to death. The table of contents. There's key quotes about the theme of the study. The display corner. I will show you ours in just a minute. Chapter questions, student explorations, community links, social studies, related themes to explore, culminating event. There's a couple of appendixes, and I would just want to show you the parts that we used, or that we tend to use whenever we do the YWAM studies. The chapter questions, they're not necessarily intended to garner, let me just put it this way. There are a variety of questions. They garner reading comprehension, how to, discussion on the subject. There's some vocabulary in there, and basically every chapter question, it's either a vocabulary question, a factual question, a question to gauge the level of the student's comprehension, and an open-ended question seeking an opinion or interpretation. So every question for each chapter, for the chapter questions, is like that. Now there are answers in the back of the book. I won't show you with this, but so you do not have to have read the material. Student explorations is this chapter, and this basically are essays, creative projects, hands-on experiences, audiovisual projects, and it gives you a variety of those. So depending on the learning style your child has, or what you want to include in a study, there is plenty here. You can tailor it to meet every age group that you wish. Let's move on. Probably the most extensive part for this particular book was the social studies chapter. Categories are places, journey, terms and vocabulary, geographical characteristics, a timeline, conceptual things, conceptual questions. So obviously it gives you places to look at, geography-wise. You can spend a whole lot of time with this. These related themes to explore, that's kind of just taking in other directions. It's not quite as specific, but you can kind of take some rabbit trails in other directions. Culminating events. Now the culminating event is like after you have done everything you need to do. You have a big old party and you read your essays out loud, and you have some music and you fix some food, and of course we're all about that. So it gives you ideas for the culminating event. And you have seen probably in our video that we had made some fried dough, Indian fry bread. That's what we chose to do. Books and resources, plenty of those to keep you going for days and days and days and days and days. The internet, here's also some documentaries, which I heart documentaries. I'm a big fan, and this is the one that is the favorite here. Lewis and Clark, The Journey of the Core of Discovery, Ken Burns. And we love some Ken Burns. So they give you all of those resources, some internet resources, all of these. Here's the answers to the chapter questions. For some reason I have 2 copies of that. And so that is that. I will show you just a couple of things. The display corner. This is something I generally always do when we study one of their, I just think it's really fun. You can do a corner. We actually did just a board, a foam core board. They give you a list of things that you could put on in your display corner. Woo! Almost had a list of things that you can use. We did not do that. We basically did the old print and washi tape on the foam core board. That's how we did ours. That way I can move it around, and I have done that for a long time. And so I will show you that as soon as I am done going through this unit study. And we have 1 or 2 more things to show you. This is actually, it's not a choice. It wasn't something that necessarily gave you as an idea, but I thought this would be fun. One of the ideas for the hands-on project was a brochure. There's a suggestion to do a brochure in the hands-on projects as the brochure calling for volunteers or people to go on the adventure of a lifetime with Meriwether Lewis. And what we did is kind of scaled that down, kind of made it a little more contemporary. We printed it off, but this is actually an Instagram post from Canva. We used Canva, and he wanted to explore, gave some contact information, calling for all volunteers, what that might look like in today's society. So that's something we did. Those were a few of our projects. You could spend a whole year using this curriculum. It is that intensive. It's just absolutely fantastic. So that is all I have and all I'm going to show you. But as you can see, it is well worth whatever you have to do to get one of these to study with your book. I'm going to now show you our little display corner. Okay, so I wanted to talk about our display board. It is very simple. I have done things a little bit more elaborate, and I have done simple things such as this. And that's the nice thing about doing something like this is you don't have to go crazy if you don't have the resources or if you don't have necessarily the time, but it does give you a nice overview of kind of what you're talking about. I used just a simple piece of foam core board from the Dollar Tree, which is a very inexpensive way to go. They hold up. I have used them before. I've done displays on my whiteboard. Obviously, that is not as mobile, so I found I didn't like doing that. What I did was we printed off some resources that we found using the suggested internet resources or the just, you know, advice from the unit study. And I'm going to start over here. This is, of course, is the official portrait of Meriwether Lewis. This is the picture of, you know, William Clark, Meriwether Lewis, and Sacagawea, the famous rendering. This is a map. Now, I could have used the map that came with the unit study itself, and we could have worked on that. That was a possibility. We have a picture of a buffalo. I have something I'm going to talk about in just a minute. This is actually a picture of, we used to live, this is the Katy Trail in Boonville, Missouri, and we used to live, when Josiah was a little boy, we lived along the Lewis and Clark Trail in Missouri, and this was right there, and so that's a picture of that. I thought that would be nice to have there as a little bit of, just interesting little fact. This is a picture of, we got from the Library of Congress. It was a journal entry from, from, actually, it was a letter. It was a letter. It was a famous letter to the President of the United States from Meriwether Lewis. Up here is a picture of a famous Indian, an Indian picture. I should have put, the only thing I regret about this one is I didn't, the other ones I included where they came from, and this one I did not. And so I wish I would have done that because I don't remember where that came from. I did it down here, included, excuse me, I'm going to move some stuff around. I included that one there. Now these two things were very, very interesting. This is actually a specimen sent to President Jefferson of a woodpecker. It's called the Lewis woodpecker. And that's just like, that's like all his feathers and stuff. It was a specimen collected. And it says where it was collected, what year. And that is located at the Library of Congress. And also this is right here, another specimen of some kind of weaves. And I have it written there. These things we just attached with washi tape. Some simple washi tape. So I could move around and apply as needed or as I wanted to. And also so I could use this board again. If you have a child who is very crafty and is all about the display, this would be a great project for them to do. Josiah could care less. So I've always been given carte blanche about how to do these things. Of course, some of them have been a lot more elaborate. I was going to tell you something interesting and a suggestion about the buffalo here. Somewhere I have pictures of Josiah when he was little. We had been visiting my sister in Oklahoma, and she lives where the buffalo roam. That's where part of Oklahoma she lives. And there was a museum there, and a huge stuffed bison there. And I had some pictures of him, and I thought that would have been really interesting to include in this board. But for some reason, I could not find them immediately, and then we needed to move on. But if you've got field trip pictures, any kind of personal connection to, something you're studying within a historical context, I think that's always a good idea to add. It kind of brings it into present day also. Gives you a little bit of a connection with it. So that is what I have for you for my board. I'm going to return you to the unit study overview. So I hope you found that enlightening, my little look-see at the books, at the unit study. It is very well done. Very, very well done. And as such, then that gives you plenty of options to use the books themselves from YWAM Publishing. You can use it as a read-alone, just biography. I have done that. You can use it as a part of a broader, bigger study. So let's say you're studying a particular area of history. There's going to be somebody that you find in there that you can plug into. You can use it, as you saw, there's enough material to use it as a complete study on its own. So lots of ways to do it. I believe I mentioned that all editions, that it becomes an audiobooks. There's a lot of ways to read them. My own son, he is 17 and a junior in high school. He is dyslexic, and while he has made great strides in his reading, I still sometimes we will do the read aloud, or I will use an audio product, and I really appreciate that. These particular books, though, I feel like they're they move along really well. They're engaging, and there's also a lot of white space. So sometimes I have just, like now, I am just assigning him, a certain amount to read every day so he doesn't become frustrated with it. But I feel like they're easy to read aloud and easy to read. Let me talk about the other book that I have here. It is George Washington Carver, From Slave to Scientist, and this is another one of their Heroes of History book. I brought this one out because this was kind of special to us. We have a connection with George Washington Carver in that we used to live not so far, maybe an hour away from the George Washington National Memorial Park, and it's located in Diamond, Missouri. And it is a wonderful, wonderful place. We would visit maybe a couple of times a year because it was free. And it had a beautiful museum on the inside. It had a actual laboratory that you could go and do experiments. I know that we did some peanut experiments. It also has beautiful walking trails. There's an area that they have kind of gone back to the natural prairie, the natural grasses. Just a wonderful place to visit. Of course, he is not only a brilliant scientist, but he also was a man of faith. And he was also born a slave. So we really enjoyed this book too. And I'm going to try and link that that review below. There's a couple of links I'm going to give you. I'm going to link you to the YWAM Publishing site itself. I'm going to link you to Meriwether Lewis, Off the Edge of the Map. I'm going to link you to the unit study page. Now, this will not take you directly to the unit study you saw just a little bit ago, but it will take you to the general product page, and you can go from there. I'm going to link you to the Homeschool Review Crew blog, which will give you the option to read or watch reviews from lots of different folks. And there was a big list to choose from. And we have reviewed several of them. And I'm going to try, if I can find it, link at least one of the Christian heroes of the faith series, so you can kind of see if that's something you're interested in. I would suggest, now these are so reasonable. You can, of course you can pass them along or resell them. We keep them because this is good reading in any event. So most likely this one is going to go on. I mentioned I was a history curriculum writer, and this one is information on, and this particular book is going to go on in the required reading list. So I like to use them that way, even though technically Josiah and I are actually, he's in the Middle Ages. He's studying some Middle Ages right now. So this isn't something we would stick in our normal rotation for the Middle Ages, obviously. But it is something we can pick up again when we are studying that era of history, or just read it on its own. We love biographies, and this is one that would get picked up. So these are reasonable, and they are certainly things that you can plug in and use books that you can use a variety of different ways. I would suggest you just you go look at the list and start in something. Ask your child what he or she is interested in. That's what we have done a lot of, and start there. I think our first one was George Washington. I think that's the first one we did. So I think that is all I have for you, other than a good little swig of tea again. But for now, I want you to go hug your people, take some time to do some beautiful things, and I will